Hey everybody, and welcome to today's VIP Lifestyle Trainer. If you have been a follower of us for a while, then I'm sure you recognize the handsome gentleman to my right, one of our favorite experts here at the Knowledge Society, Dr. Germán Garcia Fresco, whose name I always have to sing for some reason, makes it that much more fun. He is our resident neuroscientist and is actually, very exciting, launching a new product with Ty called Neuro 67, which I have here. Hopefully we can zoom in on that. Cool. This is going to be our new brain pill, and I'm going to have Germán tell you a little bit more about it. I've been taking it for a little bit now, and definitely it has helped my focus and my attention, which is great, obviously, because we're such a busy company, and we're so busy every day. This helps me to focus a little bit better. But Germán, thank you for being with us today. We are going to talk a little bit about how relationships can affect your brain. But before we do that, why don't you kind of introduce yourself to everybody who's not familiar with you and tell us a little bit about our new product.
Sounds good. Well, welcome everybody. Glad to be here. I love doing these mini talks anyways. I enjoy teaching. So my name is Germán, or Dr. Fresco, as a lot of you know me. My background, I have a PhD in neuroscience. I'm actually a certified nutritionist now.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, I just got my nutrition certification, just expanding horizons. I've been a scientist for over 15 years now, and my expertise has now in the last few years have been related to human behavior and of course now cognitive enhancing.
Yes.
So our new pill, since you mentioned it, and appreciate the mention.
Of course. And a great bonus that you get with your purchase of Neuro 67 is Dr. Germán's, I should be calling you Dr. Fresco, sorry, Dr. Fresco's brain book. And so I've been helping edit Dr. Fresco's book. And as I was reading it today, there was a really interesting section about relationships and the effect that relationships can have on your brain. Because a lot of people today are single, or maybe even if you are married. What kind of effect does your relationship have on your brain? How does it affect how you're thinking? How does it affect how you're performing at work?
Now, relationships, excuse me, most people think of relationships as your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your wife, and your husband. And the truth is, relationships is more than that. You know. Now, when and consider that I'm thinking of this as with a brain perspective, right? You have I divide relationships in two portions. You know, inanimate relationships and animate relationships. And those inanimate relationships are your relationship with the environment. You know, because everything affects your brain. Right. The weather, the temperature, how are you feeling that day because of the smells around you, whatever it is, affects you. And when it affects you, it affects the way you behave, which in turn can affect your relationship with humans, right? So that's the inanimate relationships. The animate relationships can include anywhere from a virus and a bacteria. You know, if you're sick, you get infected by a bacteria or virus, you're not going to feel good, right? So it's going to affect you. It's going to affect your brain. So you're not going to perform good, right? When you're sick, when you get a fever and you're infected and you're coughing, you don't want to go work, you don't want to do anything. Right. And you can't think clearly. Mm-hmm. It all affects your brain. Mm-hmm. So from a bacteria all the way to your pets. Do you have a pet?
I have it.
I know. Oh, that's right. Sorry,
that's
I didn't want to mention it. I remember she was crying because she lost her dog. But you were very attached to your dog.
Yes, very.
That was a very pure relationship to an animate object, in this case an animal. It wasn't a human, but it's still a relationship where you have affections, you feel love, you know, you take care, he takes care of you, or she, was he or she? She takes care of you.
Yes.
And then finally you have the human relationships. So you see there's not just human relationships. And even within the human relationships, I divide them in four categories. We have intimate relationships, right, which are your relationships with your boyfriend, your spouse, your children, right? Your very close relationships. Those are your intimate relationships. And that's why usually people refers to as relationships.
Right, yeah.
Then you have your personal relationships. These are your relationships between you and your best friends and your good coworkers, the people that are close to you that you can share events you go out with, that you share secrets with. That's a personal relationship. It's not as close as an intimate one, but it's close enough. Then we have professional relationships. And those professional relationships are the ones that you have with your doctor, with with your lawyer, with your coworkers that you're not necessarily super close with. Yeah. So like here, in this environment, pretty much most of your relationships are, you would say, professional. You might have a few personal ones if you feel closer to one or another coworker, and that's pretty much it. And then finally, you have the fourth one, which is casual relationships, which are the relationships you have with the bus driver. When you get on the bus and the guy greets you, that's a relationship too. Or the guy, the little grandmother you hit across the street, or the teller at a store or at a bank. Those are casual relationships, but they are relationships as well, and they affect your behavior as well. I mean, think, you go to the banker pisses you off, now you're in a bad mood for the rest of the day because of a casual relationship. It wasn't your spouse, it wasn't your dog, it was the casual relationship. So, as you can see, there is a broad sense of what really a relationship is, and you must understand that all of these relationships, inanimate to animate to all the human relationships, influence how you behave and how you feel, right? So the good thing is, like, even though we have all different kinds of relationships, the techniques, the tips that we have to making or having better relationships are pretty much the same. You just have to adapt them depending on who you talk. So for example, you're not going to treat your son or your daughter the same way you're going to treat your coworker. I'm not saying you have to treat them differently, one you treat bad and one you treat good. No, you treat them all good or all bad if you're a bad person, but right, maintaining that level of relation that you have. Right. So you're going to have, so, and that, but the principles behind the way you treat those people, the way you communicate with those people, the way we talk to those people is the same. One of the things that is extremely important in any relationship is trust, right? So if your wife doesn't trust you, your coworker, the casual guy that's trying to buy something from you, nobody's going to want to have a relationship with you. Mm-hmm. So trust that, and that's why I'm saying no matter who you deal with, there's certain key things like trust that you must have with people in order to have a good relationship. Right. Now, how do we gain that trust from people, right? It's easy, but it's not easy at the same time. So there's three things that must happen for you to gain trust from people. A, they have to like you, right? If they don't like you for whatever reason, they'll never get to trust you. B, they have to understand you. They have to understand what you're saying, what you're talking to them. Let's say you are talking to your kid that's 3 or 4 years old, and you talk to him about the amygdala and how oxytocin and this and that works on the brain. He's going to look at you like, I don't know what you're talking about. He's going to walk away. Right? So you kind of dumb it down. Not that your kids or your little kids are dumb, but you talk in the language that adapts to him so that he can understand you, right, so he can trust what you're saying, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing. And then the third key is you have to have knowledge. If you don't know what you're talking about, especially when you're getting into an argument with somebody, right, if you're going to argue with somebody, make sure you do know what you're arguing about. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying you should be arguing all the time, but if my wife, for example, is a dentist, most of you know. If I have a concern or a question or a doubt on dentistry, I ask her. And even if I feel that she's not right, mm-hmm, because of her expertise, and I know she knows more than I do, I don't really argue. I give in. I'm like, you know what? She's the expert in this field. Right. I'm going to let this one slide. Even though I'm thinking she's not right, she might be confused, because no matter how good of an expert you are, you can still make mistakes. There's plenty of doctors out there that make mistakes when they're diagnosing people, but you take their word, which goes into these cognitive biases that we'll talk in a second. Yeah. But it goes into this trust mode that you just take it for granted. So when you're arguing with people, and this is a great tip, this is a tip that I've been using for many years, is I see what their expertise is. I'm like, okay, this person knows a lot about this particular topic. So when it comes to because see, what happens with arguments is like, a lot of times you're 50-50. Yeah. You think, I think I'm right, you think you're right. So the question is, who is right, right? You get to that point where it's like, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, yes, and you can't get out of it. And in your mind, you're 100% right. In your mind, you're 100%, and in my mind, I'm 100% right. So there has to be a point where either people have to walk away or give in. And my rule is, if you know more about that topic or you're more of an expert about that topic, even though I feel you're making a mistake, I will give in that particular situation. I will give in. And you'll be surprised, how many people don't do this. People that argue. We have a friend with Ty we always have fun with. We tease. He will argue about anything, knowing or not knowing. And he'll keep going forever to the point where you're like, dude, you what do you even know about that? It's like you're arguing just for the sake of arguing. And that's not the point. Now, we enjoy arguing with him because we get them to that point, and it's just fun. But the point is, you don't want to have that situation with your wife. So if your wife, for example, raising the children, if you are always out working, you're a working dad, you're always out, mom's there with the children, and there is an argument about the children, well, guess what? Who's been taking care of the children 24/7 every day for the last 5 years, let's say? Mom. So you know what, Dad? Stop arguing with mom and listen to her and give in and be like, hey, you know what? She's been doing this without me, and the kids seem to be doing pretty good, so I'm not going to get stuck on this particular point. Right. And vice versa. If dad is the one that, let's say, he goes out to work, he brings the money, he deals with the financials, he knows how to run with the money, and there is an argument where, let's say, dad says, no, we can't afford this, we shouldn't buy this, it's not a good idea. Mom, don't argue with him. Don't go into, he knows better because he's the one dealing with that. So I hope I made my point clear.
Yeah.
So
bringing back to what those relationships, so you have those arguments or you have those interactions. Like, I went to get my car looked at, and this car dealer made me so angry. I couldn't even focus. I was telling Maya and Willa about it, and I was like, this guy, I can't believe he said this, da-da-da-da. So clearly he had an effect on my brain. Yeah. What kind of effects are these relationships having on your brain?
So what's happening there is, I call that the sleazy car dealership effect. And why I call it that is because I always give that example. And it's funny that it's a perfect example, and you actually had that happen to you.
Oh, he got me so
What happens to your brain is, we have a portion of the brain that's called, we call it the reptilian brain, which is the first part of the brain, the ancient form of the brain. That, in fact, if you look at a reptilian brain, they have a brain that's just like that, like the one we have, but we just developed more on top of it, right? We've developed basically the cerebral cortex, which allows us to think and make decisions properly. So with this reptilian brain, what happens is it's basically trained to either allow information to go through or not based on your emotions. It's highly linked to your limbic system, which is your emotional reward system, highly linked with the amygdala. And what happens is, so something happens to you. That information, and this is where I tell people, where nobody is 100% rational. You can make the most rational decisions possible, but every single decision, in fact, 95% of your decisions are not rational. They're emotion-based. Wow. So what's happening is, in your case, so when you receive a piece of information, that piece of information goes into your brain. It goes in through your emotional centers. Your emotional centers talk back to your reptilian brain. The reptilian brain is the one that decides it goes through the rational centers or not. So it's like a bouncer on a club. It's like, you go in, you do not go in. Or your secretary, it's like, no, he's not available, sorry, boom. Okay. So what happened with you was, your reptilian brain was like, sorry, she's not available anymore. So no matter what this guy says, he pissed you off, he ain't getting into your rational brain where he can allow to convince you to make the right decision, to buy that car, to get an upgrade or whatever. Because at that point, you shut off your brain, your reptilian brain basically shut off your rational centers. This is what happens when there's like a passion crime, or when you're arguing so hard and you get into a fight, or you curse out your spouse or your girlfriend, or you do stuff with your regret, or you're like, oh man, what did I do? Well, basically what happened is, your reptilian brain shut off your rational centers, your thinking abilities, and it just works purely on, basic instinct. Like, so you're basically down to like an animal. And that's why people kill each other in certain occasions. It's like, they're not thinking the consequences. Like, oh, if I hit my girlfriend right now, she's gonna walk out of me, and I'll never see her again. Well, at that moment, that guy just hit her, and then it's like, oh, what did I do? Yeah. It's that emotional center shuts down. It's like, now I need to be. It's kind of like you go into this fight or flight mode,
right?
And there's nothing you can do about it,
yep.
except understand how your brain works and say, okay, I need to figure out how to channel my emotions and how to figure out how to calm down so that this doesn't happen to me.
Yeah. Now, intimate relationships. I've read studies where some say that single people are happier, some say that married people are happier. What kind of effect does your relationship with your boyfriend or girlfriend have on your brain? And from your research, do you think that brains are healthier when you have a partner, or can you have as healthy of a brain? And if you think that, can someone who's single have as healthy of a brain? Can you get that same kind of thing from your personal relationships, your casual relationships, your professional relationships?
Well, I'll answer it this way. There's a study, it's called the Harvard study. It was a 75-year-long study, and where they basically, it was a study of happiness. Uh-huh. And they came down to the single most important thing on being happy is having meaningful relationships. Wow. They've done studies where they followed for 75 years people, with relationship, without relationship, anything, but meaningful. So to answer your question, you could be single and be extremely happy if you have very meaningful relationships. Now, what does meaningful relationships mean? Usually, being married is having a meaningful relationship, or dating somebody is having meaningful relationships. But you could achieve true happiness as a single person, when you're 80 years old, if you're still surrounded by meaningful relationships. And by meaningful relationships, I don't mean like, being married, for example. Let's talk for being married for a second. You could be married and be miserable. Right. There's lots of people. Lots of people in this world that are miserable. Well, that's not a meaningful relationship. That's a pointless. In fact, that's a negative relationship because it's taking away from your happiness. It's taking away from you creating a meaningful relationship with somebody else or having more meaningful relationships. You might have that wife that's like never lets you go out with your friends. Right. And it's like, well, now you're cutting off all these other meaningful relationships that you could have, but you can't because, she's like, you're not going out, right. Or vice versa. Or you got a crazy guy that's like, you stay home and you never walk out of the house. Yeah. Well, you can't have meaningful relationships that have it. So, in general, I would say if you are in a stable relationship that's healthy and you guys love each other and take care of each other, that's automatically a very important, meaningful relationship, which would lead to a happier life. What also happens too when you are married, usually you have children. Mm-hmm. When you have children, those children become part of your meaningful relationships too, right. A very strong one. And me, I have kids, and I can tell you, it's the bond between your children is so strong that it's like it just makes you happy just having them around. Yeah. So that's why a lot of studies say, well, being married shows that it makes usually people happy, but it's not because you're married. It's because you're having a meaningful relationship that's creating your progeny, that's creating more meaningful relationships. So all of a sudden, you're married, you're happy with your marriage, you have 3 or 4 kids. Now you have 4 or 5 meaningful relationships, plus other family members, plus your friends. Now you have a very fulfilling life. So the key is, like I said, having those relationships.
So what are the effects that a meaningful relationship has on your brain?
So many things happen. There's a lot of chemical releases in your brain, from dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, all these things that cause, happiness, right? So oxytocin is a very important one. It's actually a hormone that's released, and they call it the love hormone. And actually Helen Fisher, who is the leading expert in this topic, you can read, she's written a bunch of books about this. But basically oxytocin is the attachment hormone. So when you are in a relationship, you release these hormones and you get that sense of attachment. You also release a lot of serotonin. Serotonin is a feel good, feel happy type of chemical. Mm-hmm. People that are depressed usually have very low levels of serotonin, so they need to take antidepressants, which are basically boosters of serotonin or inhibitory things that inhibit inhibitory neurotransmitters. And then the other one is dopamine. So when you have dopamine is the key for reward, and it's the reward and seeking behavior chemical. So it's the chemical that gets released in your brain when you want something again. So if you went out on a date and you kissed that night, well, you go back home, you're like, oh, I want that again. I want to see her again. And all these chemicals are crazy in your brain. Serotonin's up, oxytocin, you know, and dopamine, it's like, it's anticipating. You start imagining next time you see her on the next day, you're going to kiss her again, or you're going to kiss him again. And that anticipation gives you a rush of excitement and euphoria of like, oh, I want to do it again. Yeah. What happens with dopamine, this is where people are like, why can't we just stay like in love with butterflies like the first few months when you met somebody, right? Phase. How? Unfortunately, you know, the brain doesn't work that way. It becomes, you could say, numb to it. It's like drug addicts. The more cocaine they do, the more they need, because what happens, the brain starts getting used to it, and it's like, hey, we're overexciting ourselves for no reason, so they reduce the levels of dopamine. Your brain reduces the levels of dopamine receptors, actually. So it's actually a genetic, it's at the level of genes that it's changing. So you reduce the levels of dopamine receptors, so now you need more drug to release more dopamine to get that same rush. And kind of the same thing is going on with your brain when you are on a routine with the same person over and over. What happens later is more of an attachment, more of a friendship, and that's why I say meaningful relationships, because grandpa and grandma are not in love like, you know, they were on the first day where they're kissing and having sex all day, right? But they're still love each other, right? It's almost like that's why I call it infatuation, or a lot of people call it infatuation. The first few months you're infatuated. It's like a very intense feeling of desire and, you know, and a very strong sexual attachment. But then later on it converts more into a friendship, right? So your relationship with your spouse, it becomes the same as your relationship with your kids, with your best friend, as same as with your spouse. And that's where you want it. You want it to be that way, because if not, think when you're in love, can you think of anything else when you're in that infatuation? You're like, why isn't he not texting me? I need to text him. I'm going to call him. Well, where are you? Well, let's go see each other. You want to hang out every single minute. Well, that's not productive if you think about it.
Totally.
If you lived like that every single day of your life, it would be great feeling for your brain, but you'll be the most unproductive person ever, right? Yeah. So it's the same thing. It's the same thing when you buy a car. You buy a brand new Ferrari, you're excited, you want to go drive it every day for the next 2 months. And then all of a sudden it's like, man, it's just a Ferrari. Right. So it's a mechanism so your brain doesn't get too excited all the time, because it doesn't need to, because being excited so much takes away from other stuff. Well,
that's great. That's some great information and insight about relationships and how it can affect your brain and what different things are going on in your brain when you get into a relationship or you get into an argument with someone who's a casual relationship. So thank you very much, Dr. Fresco.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Dr. Fresco gave us some good information about the different types of relationships, and for your question below, you can either talk about a time with a casual relationship, like I said with the car dealer, or an intimate relationship, and what is one thing you can do, knowing a little bit more about how your brain works now, that will make those relationships, a little more successful, or maybe you don't get so reactive when you have a casual relationship. Give you one tip that you will use below, and we'll see you on the next lesson.